take this job and shove it. I ain't working here no more. Seriously. It did cause a bit of a ruffle. Gave a proper notice.
For nearly a decade, one man turned scrap metal, junkyard parts, and impossible client requests into rolling works of art on national television. Millions of viewers tuned in to watch him work. But behind the polished 42-minute episodes was a much longer, much rougher story. One that started decades before the cameras ever showed up, and one that eventually led him to walk away from the very show that made him famous. This is the real story of Ian Roussel. Ian Roussel was born on November 19, 1970, in Sunland, California, a small community tucked into the northeastern edge of the San Fernando Valley. Southern California in the 1970s and 80s was, in many ways, the epicenter of American car culture, a place where hot rods, lowriders, and custom builds weren't a niche hobby, but a way of life. Ian grew up immersed in that world. Public biographies consistently describe a childhood spent close to his father, a car enthusiast who nurtured Ian's early fascination with mechanics and fabrication rather than steering him toward more conventional pastimes. While detailed records of his exact upbringing remain limited, Roussel has kept much of his personal history out of the media. The through line across every account of his early life is the same. He was drawn to metal, tools, and machines from a very young age, and that pull never let go. Unlike many people who stumble into a trade, Ian seems to have known early on what he wanted to do with his life. He didn't pursue it through a university program or a formal apprenticeship pipeline. Instead, he built his skills the way generations of American hot rodders before him did, by doing the work, over and over, in a garage, learning through trial, error, and repetition. Over time, that hands-on education became the foundation of a career that would eventually span more than 3 decades in metal fabrication and custom car building. It's worth noting how much of Ian's early life simply isn't part of the public record. Interviews and profiles repeatedly note that he has said very little about his parents, his siblings, or his formal education. No detailed account of his schooling has ever been widely published, and by most descriptions, he has preferred to let his work speak for him rather than build a public narrative around his upbringing. That kind of restraint is unusual for someone who eventually became a television personality, and it says something about how Ian has approached fame throughout his career, treating it as a byproduct of the craft rather than the point of it. What is consistently documented is the physical picture of the man behind the torch, standing roughly 6 feet 2 inches tall, recognizable in later years for his bald head, a look he's addressed candidly on social media, including sharing an old photo of himself with a full head of hair and joking about the reaction he knew it would get from longtime followers. It's a small detail, but it fits the pattern of how Ian has generally handled his public image, low-key, self-aware, and more interested in the work than in cultivating a persona. What set Ian apart from many builders in the custom car world wasn't just technical skill. Plenty of fabricators can weld a clean seam or shape a fender. What distinguished him was his philosophy. While many shops built their reputations restoring classic cars to their original factory condition, Ian moved in the opposite direction. He specialized in taking a client's idea, however unconventional, and turning it into a fully realized, one-of-a-kind vehicle. Channeled frames, chopped rooflines, custom aluminum work, vehicles built from scratch rather than assembled from bolt-on parts. He became known for treating cars less like machines to be restored and more like raw material to be sculpted. That approach didn't happen in isolation. Ian came up during an era when Southern California's custom car scene was still deeply connected to the builders who had defined the culture decades earlier. Names like Gene Winfield, Ed Big Daddy Roth, and George Barris, whose influence on hot rod and custom car aesthetics reshaped the industry starting in the 1950s and 60s. Ian has cited that lineage as a direct influence on his own work, positioning himself as a continuation of a very old American tradition rather than someone chasing a passing trend. It's a tradition built on hand-shaping metal, solving problems without CAD software or modern shortcuts, and creating vehicles that, in his own description, are built entirely from scratch. Long before full custom garage existed, Ian was already building a name for himself the hard way, through word of mouth, through show cars, and through a reputation for saying yes to builds that other shops wouldn't touch. That reputation eventually caught the attention of television producers. In 2003, according to multiple published accounts, Ian was asked to put together a DVD demonstrating his fabrication process, originally intended as a simple promotional tool. That footage found its way to people in the television industry, and what started as a modest project slowly opened the door to something much bigger. It wasn't a fast transition. Ian's first appearances on screen came through other programs before he ever had a show built around him. He appeared in Back from the Dead in 2005, its follow-up Back from the Dead 2 in 2009, and Car Warriors in 2011, a run of television experience that gave him time in front of cameras and crews years before Full Custom Garage premiered. That gap between his first TV appearance and the launch of his own series speaks to how much patience the process required. Years of pilot episodes, network conversations, and production changes passed before Full Custom Garage finally made it to air. The show premiered on MAVDV on March 28, 2014. From the outset, it distinguished itself from a crowded field of reality television. This was an era when automotive TV, and reality TV more broadly, leaned heavily on manufactured conflict, tight artificial deadlines, and larger-than-life personalities clashing on camera. Full Custom Garage took a different route. Episodes centered on the actual craft, the fabrication process, the problem-solving, the slow transformation of raw metal and salvage parts into a finished vehicle. There was little in the way of scripted drama. The show ran for multiple seasons over the following decade, eventually completing 7 seasons and building a loyal, dedicated fan base of car enthusiasts who valued authenticity over spectacle. Over that run, Full Custom Garage became more than a television program. It became a kind of pilgrimage site. Fans traveled to see Ian's shop in the Mojave Desert in person, and his workshop developed a reputation that extended well beyond the show's broadcast audience. His cars found buyers not just across the United States but internationally, with completed builds shipped to collectors in countries including Germany, the Netherlands, and Japan, a reach that few independent, solo custom builders managed to achieve without the backing of a major brand or dealership network. Alongside his television career, Ian built out a broader business. He ran a fabrication shop, developed a clothing and merchandise line for fans, sportswear, t-shirts, and caps sold directly through his own website, and cultivated a large following on social media, where he shared updates on builds, shop life, and his day-to-day work. Full Custom Garage wasn't his only television credit during this period either. In 2018, Ian appeared in additional programming under titles like Lead Sleds and Custom Cars, which streamed on Amazon Prime Video and gave him another outlet to showcase builds outside the MAVDV format. Taken together, it paints a picture of someone who treated television as one channel among several for reaching an audience, rather than the sole foundation of his career, a mindset that would matter a great deal a few years later, when the television side of that equation started to shrink. Through it all, his personal life stayed remarkably private by celebrity standards. He is married to his wife, Ian Roussel, who has been a consistent presence both in his life and, over time, increasingly in his professional work. Public sources describe the couple as sharing a passion for custom car culture, with Jamie taking on a growing role in the business side of Ian's career as the years went on, eventually becoming a visible creative partner on his YouTube channel, appearing in build videos, and, at times, addressing her own role and future with the project directly for the audience. Beyond that, however, detailed information about their marriage and family life has largely stayed out of the public record. A deliberate choice, it seems, in an industry where personal drama is often the easiest way to generate attention. Estimates of Ian's net worth vary considerably depending on the source, ranging from roughly $1 million to several $1 million, built primarily from his television work, his fabrication business, his merchandise sales, and, more recently, his YouTube revenue. None of these figures come from a confirmed primary source, and they should be read as informed public estimates rather than verified financial disclosures, which is true of almost every celebrity net worth figure circulating online, not a quirk unique to Ian's case. That restraint is notable, because Ian's public image was built almost entirely on his work rather than his personal narrative. Unlike many reality television figures whose fame is inseparable from manufactured storylines, controversies, or feuds, Ian's public profile has remained remarkably free of scandal. Available public information doesn't point to any major controversies attached to his name, no lawsuits, no public fallouts, no tabloid narratives. The conversation around him has stayed focused almost entirely on the cars. But even a career built on craftsmanship and authenticity isn't immune to the pressures of a decade-long television production schedule. By the early 2020s, signs began to emerge that Ian was looking for something different, not necessarily because the show had failed, but because the format itself had limits. In January 2023, months before he made any public announcement about leaving Full Custom Garage, Ian quietly launched a YouTube channel called Full Custom Ian. It wasn't treated as a side project or a promotional afterthought. From the start, it was built around a different philosophy: long-form, uncut content, with episodes ranging anywhere from 18 minutes to over an hour, showing the full, unpolished reality of a build, including the mistakes, the redesigns, and the dead ends that never would have made it into a tightly edited cable television episode. That timing matters. Ian didn't wait until his network relationship ended to start building an alternative. He was already laying the groundwork for independence, well before he made his exit from television official. When he did leave, it wasn't framed as a network decision or a cancellation. It was described, across multiple accounts, as his own choice. Full Custom Garage wrapped its run with its final season airing in January 2024, closing out a show that had been on the air for a full decade and had become one of the more respected names in custom car television, specifically because it resisted the genre's worst impulses toward manufactured spectacle. The transition away from network television coincided with a bigger shift in his life. In 2024, Ian and his team closed the Desert Ranch shop, the workshop that had served as the heart of his operation for years and the backdrop for much of Full Custom Garage. Multiple sources described strong fan reaction to that closure, underscoring just how closely his audience had come to associate the physical space with his identity as a builder. Rather than treating the closure as an ending, though, Ian used it as a pivot point. He moved operations to a new, larger shop, giving himself more room, better facilities, and, notably, an environment built for year-round work rather than the extremes of unmodified desert heat that had defined his earlier workspace. The timing of Ian's departure from traditional television turned out to be more consequential than it may have seemed at the time. In November 2024, Motor Trend Studios shut down its in-house production operations, a move that affected a wide swath of the automotive television landscape and left multiple other hosts and shows scrambling for new platforms almost overnight. Ian, by contrast, had already spent nearly 2 years building an independent audience on YouTube. What might have looked, in early 2023, like an unusual risk, walking away from a stable, decade-long television gig to bet on a self-produced channel, looked, by the end of 2024, like remarkably good timing. He wasn't caught flat-footed by the collapse of network automotive programming. He'd already built his own way out. Full Custom Ian has continued to grow in the years since its launch, built around the same core promise Ian made when he started it. True, hand-built fabrication, without CAD design, without bolt-on shortcuts, and without the compressed production timelines that come with a network television schedule. The channel's content has ranged from full build walkthroughs to shop tours and day-to-day project updates, giving longtime fans of Full Custom Garage a way to keep following his work in a format with far fewer constraints than the one they were used to. It's a channel built explicitly in the lineage of the old-school custom car builders Ian has cited as his influences, craftsmen who work by hand, solve problems in real time, and treated every build as a one-off rather than a repeatable formula. Since then, Ian's public trajectory has continued to shift. More recent reporting indicates he has relocated again, this time establishing a new shop in the Arizona desert, where he continues to document ongoing projects, including updates on a custom Volkswagen Beetle build for his YouTube audience. Jamie has remained closely involved in the venture, and public content from the channel has, at points, addressed her evolving role in the business directly, including her own future involvement with the channel. Through every relocation and every format change, the core of what made Ian's work resonate with audiences in the first place. Visible, hands-on fabrication, without shortcuts, has stayed consistent. It's worth being honest about what is, and isn't, publicly documented in Ian Roussel's story. Some corners of the internet have circulated dramatic, highly specific claims about his life. Health emergencies during filming, the loss of a beloved pet, detailed private struggles faced by his wife. Some of these stories may contain kernels of truth, and some builders and television personalities genuinely do face serious physical and emotional strain from grueling production schedules. The demands of reality television are well documented across the industry. But specific claims like these, when they can't be traced to a verifiable, primary source, deserve real skepticism rather than repetition. Ian Roussel himself has kept the actual details of his private life largely out of public view, and the honest, responsible version of his story is built on what can be confirmed, not on invented scenes dressed up as fact. What can be said with confidence is this: Ian Roussel spent over 3 decades mastering a craft most people only ever watch from the outside. He built a television show that stood out precisely because it refused to lean on manufactured drama, at a time when that was a genuinely unusual choice. He recognized, well before the traditional television model for automotive content began to collapse, that there was a more sustainable way to keep doing the work he loved, and he built that alternative quietly, on his own terms, before he ever needed it. When the industry around him did start to shift, he wasn't scrambling to catch up. He was already several steps ahead. That's not a story of scandal or secret suffering dressed up for clicks. It's a more ordinary, and in some ways more admirable, story about a craftsman who paid attention to where his industry was heading, who valued authenticity enough to build his career around it twice, first on cable and then again independently, and who has spent his entire adult life turning raw material into something nobody else could quite replicate. Ian Roussel's real story isn't a tragedy. It's a case study in adaptability, patience, and staying true to a craft even as the platforms around it kept changing. What do you think about Ian Roussel's journey from television to independent creator? Let us know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this one.